I've played tons of NES games, and for the most part, I've played them by myself, suffered in my fancy little gaming chair at the expense of my mental health to try to understand an era where I wasn't alive. So far, it's been a mixed bag of fun, anger, and depression. But no matter how you spin it, the NES was an incredibly important part of video gaming history. That being said, there are some games that are simply better with two players, so that's the topic of today's episode, my top 10 best two-player games on the NES. Usually this isn't something I would care about, but it was a request from FarmCat8484, an outstanding member of the community. I hope I can do your request justice. Before we begin though, we are halfway through the week, and I wanted to clarify some of the questions I've received about this new Dagger challenge. The whole purpose of the challenge is to encourage members of the community to share their gaming experiences with the masses. So to do that, all you need to do is record a short using your YouTube app, and in the description for the video, make sure to tag me using @Fortefyre. Me and Dagger will be watching them on Friday, and one lucky viewer will win a priority episode of their choice. As a reminder, the challenge for this week is to share your pride and joy game from your collection. It can be a board game or a video game. With that being said, let's begin. Life Force is an interesting game. It's a Gradius game, but it's also a spin-off, and it's also a revision at the same time. That's a lot to take in, so let's play some catch-up. Gradius is the first game in the franchise, but it's also known as Nemesis. The direct sequel to Gradius is Gradius 2, but there was an arcade spin-off from Gradius known as Salamander. This is where it gets tricky. In Japan and Europe, it was known as Salamander, but in the United States, it was known as Life Force, and when it came time to port it to the Famicom, it was actually a hybrid blend of both Salamander and the update known as Life Force in Japan, this time with a different plot. The NES version is basically the same, but with more restrictions on the gameplay. Also, fun fact, this was known in Europe as Life Force Salamander. Jesus Christ. But as per the norm with Gradius, it's a shooter, one that has some levels that are vertical and some levels that are horizontal, which was incredibly ambitious at the time. In a two-player situation, player 1 plays as Vic Viper, and player 2 plays as Lord British. No, not Richard Garriott, it's just the name of the spaceship. It's a fun time waster, and to me it deserves to be on this list. There were tons of sports games on the NES, and I even did an episode talking all about them, which I'll link down below and at the end of this video. But out of all of the sports games I played for the NES, the one that stood out the most was Tecmo Super Bowl. The NES sprite flicker game to rule them all, a game that to me was one of the most advanced games on the NES, only really rivaled by Baseball Stars, and I say that because there are some really advanced simulations going on for a full football season. That effort from the developers wasn't lost on me. But in a two-player setting, this game is tremendously fun, and it's often considered one of the most influential sports games of all time, and it had the luxury of being the most expensive NES game to be released to date, costing $54.99 in 1991, the equivalent of $123 in 2024. But you were getting so much sports ball action, who could blame Tecmo for upping the price? To me, this game is better than Tecmo Bowl in every comprehensible way, and if you like football, this is a game you need to play. This is more of a technicality because you can't play as two people on one screen, but some of my happiest gaming memories involve playing Super Mario Bros. 3 with my dad on the Wii Virtual Console. In Super Mario Bros. 1 through 3, the whole two-player aspect was managed by players taking turns attempting to complete a level. So in contrast to what we would see with other games where we are working together to accomplish a goal, it's more competitive. Dad really loved Mario, and through him, I did as well. For a long time, Super Mario Bros. 3 was my favorite Mario game, and in some ways, it still is. It's one of those comfort games that I go back to when I miss my dad, and I'm sure we all have games like that. Do you? Feel free to share them with the community down below in the comments section. I love hearing your stories and your memories, and I'm sure the rest of the community does as well. Capcom was a force to be reckoned with on the NES, especially when it came to Disney IPs. I don't know of any company that tried as hard as Capcom did to deliver quality Disney platformers. They are all solid gold to me. Darkwing Duck, DuckTales 1 and 2, and of course Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. Now you could play this single player, but what's the fun in that? The whole story of Chip 'n Dale involves them both getting into shenanigans together, so it only makes sense you nab a player 2. Player 1 is always Chip and player 2 is always Dale, and the whole plot involves us going to rescue a kitten for Mandy, and in usual Disney plot progression, we unearth some horrible news, usually to the tune of Fat Cat, the major antagonist of the Chip 'n Dale universe. This game was universally acclaimed and sold 1.2 million copies. To date, it's still up there for one of the highest selling games for Capcom, and for good reason. Its reputation exists for a reason. Renegade from Tecmo was a successful game, and it served as the start of a legacy franchise known as the Kunio-kun franchise. Now, there were tons of Kunio-kun games out there, and for the most part, the stylistic direction of Tecmo at the time, especially on the NES, was derived from one game, Super Dodgeball. It featured these chibi characters, and they were used often. They're the same sprites you would see in Nintendo World Cup, as well as River City Ransom. Now, I did play this game as a kid, but unbeknownst to me, it was a ROM hack. It went by the name of Pussy City Pimps. Yeah. Imagine my dad's face when he walked in and asked me what I was playing, and I repeated the exact same title with pride. I was a kid. I didn't know any better. Learned that day what a pussy was, though. But going back to the game, River City Ransom was more than just a beat-em-up. It was an open-world beat-em-up, which as an adult, I appreciate for the NES. I played it with my former lead moderator, Lord Knight Caleb Com, and he actually came to my house, and we beat it on Switch Online. We had a blast the whole time. In fact, the other games in the lineage, such as River City Girls, continue to be absolutely badass, and I do suggest you check out the other beat-em-ups in the franchise as well. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is one of those franchises that had a really big and almost sudden change in creative direction after the first game. We all know the first game, the platformer from hell with some of the most infuriatingly difficult obstacles that really didn't need to be there. Electric Seaweed, the Technodrome Core, yeah, that game was a force to be reckoned with. But from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 onwards, the best games in my opinion for the franchise were beat-em-ups, and in fact most of the home console entries for the franchise were beat-em-ups. If you wanted the more traditional platforming experience like you saw in the first game, then you could always play the Game Boy versions like Fall of the Foot Clan or Back from the Sewers. Or if you had a PC, you could always try to play the Manhattan Missions. Lord knows I'll be playing them at some point myself. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 The Manhattan Project was yet another NES game where we walked down the street decimating the Foot Clan. The story suggests we were taking a vacation in Key West, Florida, when Shredder pulls a Max Headroom intrusion incident, kidnaps April, and turns the entire borough of Manhattan into a floating island. I swear, Shredder is one of the most extra bad guys I have ever seen, and I feel he goes out of his way to be comically dubious. Like, he would interrupt a news broadcast to let the Turtles know he put salt in 50% of the world's Coca-Cola supply. That's his level of passive aggressiveness. With 8 fun-filled levels, this game is one that you should have in your collection. It's a solid game and one of the hallmarks for beat-em-ups on the NES. Double Dragon was an amazing game and in some ways was the first beat-em-up or brawler to make headway in the arcade spectrum. Sure, Renegade was the grandfather of the genre, but Renegade kind of sucked. Sue me. Double Dragon was where it was at. To be honest though, Double Dragon originally was supposed to be a direct sequel to Renegade, but at some point Tecmo decided to just make it its own thing. Now the first game wasn't 2-player, at least in the traditional sense, like we would have in the arcade version. Instead, we had Mode B, which was more like a one-on-one match, and that was because the developers couldn't figure out how to get it to work on the NES. But the sequel, Double Dragon 2 The Revenge, did allow for simultaneous 2-player in the story mode. We could play as Billy and Jimmy Lee working together to avenge Marion, Billy's girlfriend, that was shot and killed by Willie, the leader of the Black Warriors. I will say that this game is mean in the sense that you need a cheat code to continue, whereas the Famicom version lets you just, continue, but that's fractional. Double Dragon 2 is a massively fun game, and I do recommend it if you're looking for a solid co-op game. This game is interesting. It was released in Japan as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Super Kame Ninja. Kame meaning turtle, so Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Super Turtle Ninja. And and it was one of the most successful arcade games out there, at least in 1990, when it dominated almost every market that it was released in. We all know what Turtles beat-em-up game existed when we were growing up. For a vast majority of my audience, it'll be this one. For folks my age, it's Turtles in Time. That's the one that would often be found in Chuck E. Cheese, and that was a time to be alive. Now, on the NES, this had a different naming convention because we already know there was one Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game already released by Konami for the NES. To avoid confusing anybody, they just named it Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, and it had 2 new levels, new enemies, and of course, product placement from Pizza Hut. As I've mentioned before, beat-em-ups are always fun with friends, and while this game was fun by yourself, it's enhanced by having that second player sitting next to you. I've yet to play this fully on my own, but I do own it, and I look forward to checking it out at some point. After all, it is my next Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game to play on stream. Bobble is one of my favorite arcade games, and for the most part, every version and port of the original Bobble I've played has been a great time. I'm sure there's some stinkers out there, some overzealous developer that really wanted to port one of the most successful games from Taito that, wasn't Space Invaders on some lonely home computer. But this is the NES, and man, this game is easy, cheesy, and it's just cute. Now, this game I feel is contractually obligated to be on this list because you literally need a player 2 to get the true ending of the game. You need to put in a secret code, have a second player, and find a key before beating the final boss. And then and only then will you get the true ending. Bobble is a game where you can sit and veg out and just have a good time, and to me, that's what couch co-op has always been about, accomplishing a major goal with a friend. Well, when you think of two-player games on the NES, look no further than Contra and Super C. To me, they are both phenomenal games, and they both deserve to occupy the first place slot, which is something I don't tend to do, but it's worth doing for this particular list. Contra is the original Capcom get-good run-and-gun game that lives in infamy for being incredibly difficult, and also incredibly fun. To be honest, this was the first two-player NES game I ever played, and I made sure to play it through Parsec with my good friend and lead moderator, KingNick69. In some ways, it reminded me of how much fun I had playing this with my dad as a kid. The plot itself mentions two characters, Lance Bean and Bill Reiser, but we don't really have any backstory. But to be fair, who needs it? We're running to the right and blasting the shit out of everything in this hellacious hellstorm of projectiles. I don't know. It's massively fun. By the way, did you know that the Famicom version of the game actually has cutscenes? Well, kind of. There's an explanation of the plot for the game, and to be honest, I kind of wish they would have kept it in. But in the end, the game turned out just fine. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? Are there any NES games that you feel are significantly better with a second player? Feel free to let the community know down below. Speaking of our community, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a gathering of retro gaming enthusiasts that love to remember when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if you align with that, feel free to subscribe. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.